Hello world, it's Angelot, and I want to give you a quick tutorial on using the d3.js library to make a simple bar graph. So d3.js is not a graphing library, but it's really useful for making graphs. So this is what we will make today. The output is Svg, Scalable Vector Graphics. So let's find out how. Alright, so I've prepared a little bit in advance, just so that we don't have to type out, including these scripts and stuff. So if you look on the website for this tutorial, you can see these, and you'll have to include your own anyway. I've left a blank style element here that we can fill out to style our graph when we get that far. And I've also prepared some fake data. Hopefully you use real data. But this, I think, is a simplified but fairly typical way that you'll probably have your data formatted. You'll have some elements with a label and a value. You might have more properties that come with it, but I'll show you how that you can access data in these key value pairs rather than if it's just a straight flat array like this, which is what you might start out with. But this is a little more real world. Alright, so I'm also gonna go ahead and keep track of the maximum value of the data, so that over here I make my graph go, the x-axis stop at 80. You can also calculate the maximum, so it might stop at 77, so forth, but we're just going to go with that. And this is the number of ticks I wanted over here. So, and finally I've prepared some left and right, top and bottom margins for where the graph starts and stops drawing. And we'll go into how to use that to kind of conform your graph to the space you have. So this is a 500 by 700 pixel window, and arbitrarily chosen this color, I think from some other example. And with that, I've commented out some stuff that we'll use, but that is about the extent of what I prepared. Okay, I've made the SVG. So here is actually, I'll refresh what we're looking at here. Might as well show you the rest. Yeah, that's it. So let's see. Here we are going to create an SVG element. So we use D3 to select the body of the HTML, and I want to go here. We can look in the inspector. We have the HTML body, the SVG element, and it's got a width and height here, W and H, 500 and 700 as we set here, and we've added a group element to it with an ID and a class, so we can style this later. So now we have an SVG canvas that we can draw into, and we have data that we want to graph. So we need to do a little bit more preparation though. And for one thing, we want our X and Y axes so that we can have reference for our graph. So D3 provides some very nice scales that we can use. So for the x-axis, we want a linear scale, because our data, if you look, we have these values 16, 56. So our values go from 0 to some number, right? And we chose 80 as our maximum number. So all our data is going to be between 0 and 80, and we want to draw bars like this. So we want to be able to get the length of our our bar that we're going to draw from the data, but we want to fit it to however wide our graph is. So to do that, we have these scale functions that take a domain. So our data is from 0 to data max, and our range, so the output, is from 0 to the width, right? Except for we're going to subtract the left and right margins. Okay, so that means that if we were to put in 80, we would get back the width minus the margins. So that would give us a bar that's the maximum length. Where we put 0, we get in 0, and anything between will be mapped linearly between those two numbers. So now let's do the y-axis. So for the y-axis, we don't want a continuous number. We want to place these bars at regular intervals. So for D3 also provides a ordinal scale, and the domain for that will be, let's see, so I'm kind of cheating, I already did this right and looked it all up. I have my code over here. We will get a D3 range as the length of our data, and so this means that we will have numbers, 0, 1, 2, so forth, up to data.length, and the range will actually be range bands, which will be from the bottom margin, because we don't want to start at the bottom, we want to have an offset from the margin, so we specify that, right, to the height minus the top margin. So one thing to consider too is in SVG, if you just leave it the default way, is that the bottom is actually up here and the top is up here. So we go from the bottom margin to the top minus the top margin. And then we want this spacing factor. Okay. So, and just so we can like prove things to ourselves. I always, when I'm not quite sure about something, I want to log something. Let's do d3.range. Well, let's see if we could see what data is. d3.range data.length. Yeah, so that's what I mentioned earlier. And let's see, let's refresh this. So y is now a function, so if we look at the 0th element, it's going to give us that, the first one. And these are offsets that we're going to use to draw these bars. Okay, so now I'm going to close this. Let's get these chart top and bottom left right values so that we can it'll be more convenient to refer to them when we're drawing things instead of having to think about these calculations every time we want to place something somewhere. So the top of the chart will be actually down here, right? Because the 0, 0 is up here. So we're gonna do the height minus one of these range bands is this right here, and so we're gonna do half of one. So we're gonna move half of the range band from the top margin, and the bottom is gonna be half a range band here, and the left will be by the left margin, and the right is the width minus the right margin. Now that I think about it, this should probably be bottom margin plus that. So we'll try that. But nothing shows up because we're not drawing anything yet. Alright, so let us begin drawing things. The first thing we're going to want to see is some bars. So how do we do that? Let's make a bars variable. We have our viz variable here, which is referring to right now this group element inside the SVG. So we're going to select all, and we're going to do g.bar. Now, there is no group with a class bar yet inside this group here. So when we select that, there's nothing to select. But then we're going to do this data call, and we're going to pass in our data. And once we've done that and we do an enter call, it's going to see, okay, how many things did I select? Let's assign all the data, each element of the data to the SVG elements that I selected. And then if there's not any SVG elements, it's going to create those for us using the number of data elements. So this should make us a group element for every data element in our data array. So how do we take advantage of that? We append a group element, and we give it class bar. And now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and place these at those y ordinal intervals. So one way to do that is to transform each of these groups, and instead of just giving it some value, we want to do a function so that it will call this function for each of the elements. And so we'll get the element here and the number, like the index of that element in the array here. So we will return translate. Here, let's put this on a new line. And so we have to make a string here. Well, so we don't want to translate the x, but we want to do y of I. So this will output that offset for each element, right? Alright, close all these parentheses, and that's good. Alright, so now we should have a bar element. So let's refresh, check out the elements. Yeah, so we have an empty bar group for each piece of our data, offset like we wanted. And now we want to draw something here. So let's take our bars and append rectangles. So we can draw bars out of rectangles, right? So we want to put them at the margin. So we will give the x coordinate, which is relative to its parent object, the group. And we want to make it how many pixels wide? We will say, oops, width. We'll do another function. We'll get the data element associated with this rectangle. So remember, there's one of these for each of the data things. We did the enter function. So notice that I'm using the bars variable here, and this is the bars variable, and we're just continuing to chain these function calls. So what will we do? We will return x of d.value. So now what's going on here? We have the x function that we defined up here, right? This linear scale, and we have our D element, which is one of the data elements, and we're calling the dot value. So if remember, we have key value pairs, and value is where the actual data lives. So let's see, and we need to close some parentheses here. Now, how tall do we make these boxes? So this should make it, for the value, use that scale so that it'll make the actual pixels, however many pixels wide we want it to be. And the height, we will use y, and we'll just use the range band function to get the height, because it calculated how wide to make them given the total height and the number that we wanted. And we also need to give it a fill color, so we can do function di. Well, we only had one color actually, so maybe in the next tutorial we'll do some color interpolation. But here we have, it doesn't matter what you pass in, you're just going to get this color. So we will just, for now, we'll just pass in 0. And we also want to give it a stroke, let's say. So that's the border outline of the rectangle. Now, having done this, we should see some bars. So these are the bars placed, as we said, with the Y ordinal scale. We use X to determine their length, and we gave them a color and fill. So what are we missing though? We're missing some axes here, tick marks. We want to show the actual values and the labels. So let's go ahead and let's draw some axes, because that's always useful to have. And this is probably the easier part. Oops. So I think we're just gonna do the viz, and we're just gonna draw two simple lines. So there's apparently slicker ways to do this that I will have to try out, and maybe we can use in the next tutorial. But for now, it's pretty straightforward to do this by hand, right? Because we're just going to draw a line from the left side of the chart, or no, let's say we do this from the bottom. So we're going to have the x-coordinates both be at the left side. So this will be the up and down axis, right? So we want this x and this x. And we want it to go from the bottom to the top. Now let's see what happens. Oops. We also need to give it a stroke. There you go. So we have a line from the bottom to the top. Now let's just copy this, and we will make one go from the left to the right, and it will stay at the bottom. Oh, so there I go, confusing myself again. This is the bottom, but really this is what we mean by the bottom of this chart, right, when we talk normal English. So it's actually the top. There we go. So now we have our axes. Now let's do some labels. We can do that. Let's put that by the bars in between here. So let's see, we need to select, so we're going to make a labels variable. We'll do viz.select all, and we'll select the bars again. And this time we want to append some text. Now, where should we put these? These will be our labels here from the data, right? Because we also, if you remember here, we want to label the actual data itself on the edge, but let's do these first. So to do that, we're going to give these a class. We'll call it label, and put its x-coordinate at 0. And let's see. We want to we can do a text anchor. And I'm going to anchor these to the right, actually, so that will, align, they'll be drawn like that. And now the text itself, we can't just say, well, we can say this, let's say, and we get the same thing here for all of them. But we want to use the labels from the data. So again, we tell it to use a function. We get the data element, and we will return the data.label. Oops. There we go. So now you see that they're not quite positioned how we like to. So I want to do a little trick where we will actually use the properties of like the size of that the text takes up, like the bounding box of it, to position it more appropriately. And you might find this useful for doing other kinds of label manipulation, so forth. So what we're going to do is we're going to select the node of the labels. So this gets one of them because they're all the same size. So it works like this, and we're going to get its bounding box. Now we can select all of our labels because we gave them a class, and we can transform them. So how are we going to transform? We're going to translate them. We don't care about the x too much, but we do, let's say we want to push them down by their height, but we also want to center them in the middle of a range band. So let's first do the range band over 2. Close that out, right? So we're basically gonna, instead of starting them here, we're gonna start them here in the middle. So I'm starting in the middle, but now I want to push them down by, let's say, half their height, because they still don't look centered. So we have the height of our label. Oh, that's a little too much, and so I'm divided by 4. Now they look pretty centered. And I want to show you that what bbox is, it's an XVG rectangle, has height, width, and a position. So you can use that for other things too. Now let's do one more crucial thing before we get to these percentages. We'll do the tick marks here at the bottom, because D3 has a nice function for handling those. So let's see, where will we do that? All right. So let's do this here under these labels. So let's call them rules, because you also might want to draw rule lines going up and down, but that's something we'll save for another tutorial. For now, we are just going to select all g.rule, and of course we haven't created this yet. Well, let me do this before we make the bars. Okay, so here we need the data again, but instead of using the data, we're going to use the x value. We're going to make the x function, we're going to make ticks, and we're going to give it the number of ticks, which we specified as 5 earlier. So let's see what that looks like, right? So x.ticks num ticks. That gives us the nice labels that we're going to want here. So that's the data that we want to show, right, as labels, and we're going to want to space them out evenly like that. So we need to enter, and we need to append. Let's do another group here for the rules, and we're going to translate these, or sorry, we are going to translate them, transform, and we're going to do a function d, and we're going to translate. So in the x direction, we want them to line up along here. So we're going to start at the left side of the chart, and then we're going to get x of d. And now d is these tick marks, right? So it's going to be 20, 40, 60, and so forth. And that's where we're going to have these groups at. Close out all that stuff. Alright, so now we have our rules. And let's say first we want to append our text, right? So make some text, and we'll give it a class, let's say tick label, and we will anchor these in the middle, and we will position them at the top of the chart. And finally, what text we're going to put there, again we call the function with the data, and we return just d, because these are the numbers that will go at the bottom. So let's see what happens when we do that. Alright, so they put them there, but they're not in the right position again. So we can use our bounding box trick again. We'll select by the label, get the node, get the bounding box, and now we need to push them down, so we will transform, and we'll call function with the data, which we'll end up not using, but let's see what we do use. Translate. So we don't want to move them in the x direction at all, but in the y direction we want to move them down by their height so that they start at the top of them instead of the bottom. Do this. Okay, so let's see if that worked. Yeah, so now we pushed them down. So now you notice in this other graph we have little tick marks down here. So besides just appending some text, we can also here append little lines, and let's give them a class of tick, and we will just specify the y1 and y2. The x is already determined since these are relative, so for y1 we will do the chart top, so that should put them on this line. And then for y2, we'll do chart top plus 4 pixels, let's say. Well, that didn't seem to work. Let's see if I put this up here. Well, let's see what's going on here. We can inspect. Get rid of this. See if we can find our lines. So these are our groups of labels. So it found the line. So the line's there. We just don't have a stroke. So let's draw it in black. There we go, little lines. Okay, so the last thing we want to do now to place elements and get our graph looking like this is putting our values over there. So to do that, we need to have our bars already, because we'll be selecting them. And just like these labels, we'll do some more labels. So let's just select it again. We should really probably call this label something else, but won't matter since we're not reusing the other ones right now. So we'll just select all the bars and we'll append some text. And the tricky part is positioning everything the way we want it to be. So I'll give this class label as well. Or no, I'll give this class value, since this is from the value of our data. Let's see, and we want to set the x attribute for now, so we'll do another function, get the data, and we will return just a value, the x at the value. So and let's anchor these from the left. And finally, we need some text to show. So we'll use the function on the data so we can get the value. Right? Let's see if that shows up. It does. So we get them, but things are not quite in the right place, as you can see. And let's add that % sign. So let's just do some simple string concatenation. Like so. Okay. So things are not quite where we want them to be. Let us fix that with our newfound bounding box trick. So I'll get the bounding box, and we'll select our new value class. Oops. And transform yet again. Do a lot of transformations. So, why don't we just do this up here and as like the X attribute or Y attribute, or do the transform up here? Well, we have to create these label nodes first before we can get their SVG properties, because now we get the actual size as they show up in SVG, and if you scale things up or change the font size, all that stuff, it will still work because it's already created and it gets the bounding box from that. So let's translate the Y. Let's see, translate. And I actually forgot something when I was returning the X attribute, so we'll go back and fix the X in a second. So the Y though, let's put it in the center again. We'll do the range band over 2, which probably won't be quite enough, but should help. Yeah, so there they are. Not quite centered, so let's do the height over 4 again. That seems to work. Yeah, so they look pretty centered. So they're in the bar chart, which you might like, except for this guy right here. But we forgot to add, or I forgot to add, you might have realized, the margin. So let's add the margin. Now it puts them right at the edge, so let's give them a little bit of breathing room. And there we go. So now we have our chart, and we can style it, because you see it looks a little different from this one, right? So the nice thing about SVG and with D3 and the way we set everything up with labels and classes and stuff is that we can go up here to our style section and we can start giving the classes attributes or styles. So let's say we want to make the font family, I don't know, Verdana. The font size, let's see, I already chose these. Where are we at? So let's make 15 point. Make the color gray, and we can even mess with the opacity of our. So say make it 0.6. Let's see what happens to our label. Yeah, so we get these gray sort of semi-transparent labels over here. Let's say we do something very similar for value, and got 11 points. Yeah, we get nicer fonts over here. Just close this. And then finally for the tick labels, we can say font size, do 15 point. Same here. Verdana. We'll do all the same. Should just copy paste it now. There. So now we pretty much have the same. Ooh, looks exactly the same there. But there's one more thing I do want to point out, is that you can do in the styles here, you can override the for instance, we have the bar class. We can set the fill to black, let's say. Let's see what happens. Oh, that didn't work, huh? Oh, I'm not setting. There we go. So I want to change the styles of the rectangles. Oh, it's not letting. Oops. Let me type it right. So you can actually style the SVG stuff. We set some of these attributes in the SVG, but we can override it here in CSS. So that's pretty nice. You can make templates and switch out your CSS and get different styles from the same graph. The one problem I've heard about this is that you can't use CSS when you want to port your SVG into something like Illustrator or other programs. So then you'll actually want to programmatically set these attributes. So that's a tutorial. You can see the code up on GitHub, and Angelot, and thanks for watching. Bye.